Have you ever felt totally exhausted by the simple act of just, well, being yourself online?
Oh, yeah. That is a feeling going around everywhere right now.
Right. And I don't mean the kind of tired you feel after a long day at the office or like a hard workout.
The physical fatigue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I am talking about that moment when you're sitting on your couch at 11 at night, just scrolling through your feeds.
Closing app after app.
Yeah, closing apps, swiping, and you feel this strange, lingering sense of burnout that you just can't quite put into
It's
words.
heavy.
It really is.
Yeah.
Your eyes might be burning a little, sure, but the fatigue isn't physical. It's something so much deeper.
It's an exhaustion of your actual identity.
Yes. You finally lock your screen, right? You put the phone face down on the coffee table.
But the weight doesn't go away.
No, the weight of having to constantly present yourself, to define yourself, and somehow defend yourself to a completely invisible audience, it just stays sitting right there on your chest.
It is a profoundly modern sensation. And honestly, if you are feeling that way, you are absolutely not alone.
It's everywhere.
It is incredibly pervasive across almost all demographics right now. I mean, people often describe it to psychologists as feeling like they are constantly standing on a brightly lit stage.
Oh, wow. Like performing.
Exactly. Performing for a crowd they can't even see, even when they are entirely alone in their own living room.
That is so creepy, but so accurate.
Right. The quiet moments just don't feel quiet anymore. There is this background hum of perceived observation.
The background hum. That is exactly it. And today we are doing a deep dive into a fascinating set of sources anchored by a document titled Catechism vis Emotional Subjectivism.
It's a brilliant text.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to uncover exactly why the 2026 digital landscape is uniquely and frankly meticulously designed to break down our mental and spiritual resilience.
To essentially figure out why we are all walking around feeling so hollowed out and tired.
Exactly. But more importantly, we are going to explore a potential way out. We are going to look at why an ancient, often misunderstood, and honestly heavily stereotyped practice, the catechism, might actually be the ultimate psychological life hack for the modern age.
We're going to look at this material through a highly interdisciplinary lens today, which is what makes these sources so compelling.
Yeah, we're pulling from a lot of different fields.
We will be pulling from cognitive psychology, for sure, looking at the literal biological mechanics of how the human brain actually processes and categorizes information.
And stores it.
Right. And we will be examining history to see how real human communities under extreme, unimaginable pressure manage to survive without losing their minds.
Which is wild to read about.
It really is. And of course, we will be looking at theology, because at the dead center of this source material is a profound, unavoidable argument about how human beings actually construct their baseline sense of reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to look at the cure, which is this ancient idea of the catechism, we really have to accurately diagnose the disease.
You have to know what you're treating.
Right. Why are modern individuals so chronically, deeply tired? And the source material doesn't start with smartphones or social media algorithms.
No, it dials the clock way back.
Way back. It explores this massive philosophical shift in human identity. The authors point to sociologists and philosophers, guys like Philip Rieff, Alasdair MacIntyre, and Charles Taylor.
Heavy hitters in sociology.
Definitely. And they documented a transition in how we view the self, stating that we move from a framework of something called mimesis to a framework called poiesis.
Yes, mimesis and poiesis.
I have to admit, when I first read those terms, my eyes glazed over a bit. I mean, can you break down what mimesis and poiesis actually mean for a normal person just trying to navigate their life today?
It is dense terminology, for sure, but grasping these two concepts is really the key to understanding the entire modern condition.
Okay, I'm with you.
They represent two entirely different universes of human experience. Let's start with mimesis.
Okay, mimesis.
Historically speaking, Western civilization, and truly the vast majority of traditional civilizations across the globe, operated on a mimetic understanding of human identity. The word mimesis essentially means imitation or reflection.
Like a mirror.
Like a mirror, yeah. In a mimetic framework, the fundamental belief is that human flourishing is achieved by conforming yourself to a pre-existing, sacred, and objective order.
So the meaning of life was already there, baked into the universe. You just had to figure out how to, step into it.
That captures it perfectly. Imagine living in a world where the cosmos has a very clear, undeniable architecture.
Okay, blueprint.
Exactly. There is a natural law. There is a divine creator who ordered the universe. There are firm, unquestionable external structures of family, of local community, and of the church.
So you kind of just fit into a slot.
Right. In that world, your personal identity isn't something you have to dig deep inside yourself to find. Your identity is discovered through your outward relationships to those external realities.
You are a son, you are a daughter, you are a farmer, you're a believer.
Exactly. You didn't wake up in the morning and feel the crushing burden of having to invent the meaning of the universe.
Which sounds kind of nice, honestly.
It provides immense relief. Your only job was to figure out how to align your daily life and your moral choices with the meaning that already objectively existed. Psychologically speaking, that provides a tremendous, almost unfathomable amount of stability.
Because the anchor is outside of the boat.
Oh, that is a wonderful analogy. Yes,
Yeah.
the anchor is outside the boat, dropped deep into solid, immovable bedrock.
So the boat might rock, but it doesn't float away.
Right. Even if the waters get incredibly choppy, even if you experience personal tragedy, famine, or war, the bedrock doesn't move. You might suffer, but your underlying reality remains intact.
Okay, so that's mimesis. But things changed.
Dramatically. As our sources detail, society experienced a monumental tectonic philosophical inversion.
When did this happen?
This shift began gaining massive cultural traction with thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the broader Romantic movement. They introduced a completely different paradigm for human existence, which brings us to the second term.
Poiesis.
Yes, poiesis. The root of poiesis means to make, to form, or to create.
Which is where we get the word poetry, right? The act of creating something totally new.
Exactly. In this new poetic framework, the entire script is flipped. Society, historic institutions, and those external structures we just talked about were completely recast.
They became the bad guys.
They did. They were no longer seen as helpful guides or necessary anchors. Instead, they were viewed as oppressive, corrupting, artificial forces that basically crushed the human spirit.
Wow. So where do you find truth then?
The new driving belief was that the inner, unmediated, raw feelings of the isolated individual were the ultimate, purest form of truth.
Just looking inward.
Right. The goal of life completely changed. You no longer conform to an external order. Instead, you are tasked with creating your own unique order from within yourself.
The sources mention a phrase used by sociologists Robert Bellah and Charles Taylor here, expressive individualism.
Yes, and that is the air we breathe today. Expressive individualism is the deeply held, almost unquestioned cultural belief that the highest, most noble purpose of human life is to look inward, excavate your own unique hidden desires, and then express them outwardly to the world.
And if you do that, you get a gold star.
You are deemed authentic, but if you allow any external authority to tell you how to live, you are deemed inauthentic or suppressed.
Man, it's like humanity switched from navigating by the North Star to being told, hey, just draw your own map while you're driving blindfolded.
That really is.
No wonder we're all so utterly exhausted. We are bearing the weight of infinite self-definition. I mean, if I have to wake up every single day and decide what is good, what is evil, what my purpose is, and who I fundamentally am without any external help,
Yeah.
that is a full-time job.
What's fascinating here is the severe psychological outcome of this shift, which Charles Taylor explores deeply in the text. Because the modern self is entirely self-created because it is built on this foundation of poiesis rather than mimesis, it is inherently fragile.
Because it's just made of your own thoughts.
Exactly. A self-created identity has no external bedrock. Therefore, to sustain its own existence, it requires constant, unending validation from society.
Oh, I see where this is going. Because if you are the sole, exclusive author of your identity and you present it to the world and nobody claps, does that identity even exist?
And there you have the existential terror of the modern age.
That is terrifying.
It is. In a mimetic world, if the crowd boos you or if society rejects you, you can fall back on the objective reality. You can say, the crowd hates me, but I am still a child of God and I'm still fulfilling my moral duty.
Right. The booing hurts, but it doesn't destroy your reality.
But in a poetic world where your identity is made entirely out of your own inner feelings and self-expression, if the crowd boos, your very reality fractures.
Because there's nothing underneath.
Nothing to fall back on. Charles Taylor describes our current cultural condition as living within the immanent frame.
The immanent frame. Okay, can you flesh that out? What does it feel like to actually live inside that frame?
Living in the immanent frame means operating within a worldview that strictly, ruthlessly limits human meaning to the natural, observable, material world.
So nothing spiritual or eternal.
It strips away all transcendent authority. There is no higher realm, there is no eternal law judging human actions, there is no sacred order. There is only the here and now, the material world, and whatever meaning we can invent for ourselves before we die.
So it is like living in a house with no windows to the outside world. Everything you need to make sense of your life has to be found somewhere inside the house.
That's a great way to picture it.
And Taylor pairs this with something he calls the nova effect, right? Which sounds like a cosmic explosion.
It is an explosion, a cultural one. The nova effect is the direct, inevitable result of living inside this immanent frame. Because society has dismantled the default, universally accepted divine order, there hasn't just been a shift to one new belief system.
No shatter.
There has been an absolute explosion, a supernova of spiritual and moral options. We are flooded with competing philosophies, micro-identities, and ethical frameworks.
It's too much choice.
Way too much. The burden is now placed entirely on the shoulders of the individual to curate their own bespoke belief system. You basically have to walk down the philosophical grocery aisle and pick your ethics, your spirituality, your worldview from a massive, endless buffet of options.
Knowing that tomorrow there will be 50 new options on the shelf.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the sociologist Philip Reeve's concept of psychological man. Our sources mention this as the defining modern archetype, like the kind of person who naturally emerges from this nova effect. Who exactly is psychological man?
Reeve contrasted psychological man with previous historical archetypes. In the past, you had religious man or political man. Those types of people might willingly sacrifice their personal, momentary happiness for a higher duty.
Whether that was a duty to God, to the state, or to their family.
Right. Psychological man is completely different. This is the modern figure who pursues therapeutic well-being, personal happiness, and emotional comfort above absolutely all traditional moral obligations.
Comfort is king.
Yes. Psychological man will gladly sacrifice duty, sever relationships, and discard external truth the moment those things interfere with his internal sense of therapeutic well-being.
So the ultimate sin for psychological man is to feel uncomfortable or unfulfilled.
Precisely. But as the sources argue, building your life entirely around avoiding discomfort creates a profoundly fragile identity. It cracks under the slightest pressure because its only foundation is the shifting sand of momentary internal feelings.
Okay, so let's synthesize this. That is the philosophical background. We have arrived at this point in history where we possessed this fragile, self-created identity. We desperately need constant external validation to prove we exist, and we are fundamentally exhausted by the burden of defining the universe from scratch every single morning.
We are worn out before we even start the day.
Right. But now we have to transition from the ivory tower of philosophy into the messy reality of our current moment. If the burden of self-creation leaves us this vulnerable, what actually happens when that fragile, exhausted self pulls a glass rectangle out of their pocket and logs onto the internet in the year 2026?
That intersection is the crux of the crisis.
It's a bad combination.
It's toxic. That is where a deep philosophical vulnerability meets an incredibly aggressive, highly capitalized technological exploitation. We have to understand that the digital infrastructure of 2026 is not a neutral town square.
It's not just a bulletin board.
It is not a passive corkboard where people just pin up pictures of their breakfast anymore. It is highly optimized, and it has an agenda.
Let's get into the biological mechanics of that, because the sources talk at length about engagement-based algorithms. We hear that term thrown around a lot in tech circles, but how does the code specifically interact with this fragile, expressive individualist we just spent so much time describing?
To understand the tech, we first have to look at cognitive psychology and evolutionary biology.
Okay, back to biology.
The human brain comes pre-installed with a survival trait called a negativity bias. Over millions of years, we became hardwired to react far more intensely and far more rapidly to threats, negative stimuli, and things that provoke fear or anger.
Because it kept us alive.
Exactly. From a pure evolutionary standpoint on the savannah, noticing the rustling in the bushes that might be a predator was infinitely more important than noticing a beautiful sunset.
Right, if you miss the sunset, you just miss a pretty view. If you miss the predator, you are dead.
Your lunch. So our brains are literally designed to prioritize bad news for survival.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, fast forward to the modern digital age. Social media platforms and digital networks operate on corporate business models that absolutely require human attention to generate advertising revenue. They need maximum user retention.
They need eyeballs.
In the early days, they thought maybe they could keep people engaged by connecting them with friends. But their algorithms quickly, almost accidentally, learned a dark biological truth.
Uh-oh.
The most efficient, guaranteed way to capture and hold human attention is not by showing us things that make us feel peaceful, happy, or content.
Because if you feel peaceful, you put the phone down and go for a walk. Peace does not keep you scrolling.
Exactly. Peace is bad for dizziness. So, to maximize time on site, the algorithms systematically learn to amplify what psychologists categorize as IME information.
IME, intergroup moralized and emotional information.
Yes. The system is meticulously designed to map your specific psychological profile. It learns exactly what triggers your unique sense of outrage, what taps into your political hostility, and what makes you feel morally superior.
It builds a custom trap for you.
Once it maps that, it feeds you a continuous, infinite stream of that exact material. It weaponizes your negativity bias against you.
Here's where it gets really interesting in the source material. It introduces this concept of cognitive load saturation.
It's a crucial concept.
And it explicitly points out that these platforms don't usually break our resilience with one massive, overwhelmingly traumatic event.
No, it's insidious.
Right. It's not one single horrific video that destroys our mental health. It's the micro decisions. I mean, every single time you flick your thumb to scroll, you are constantly evaluating trade-offs.
Yes, hundreds of times a minute.
You are interpreting highly charged political content. You are deciding whether you need to reply to an aggressive notification. You are assessing if a viral cultural rumor is actually true or just AI-generated noise.
And because the internet compresses time and space, blurring the line between truth and rumor instantly, you are doing this evaluation at light speed.
And what people don't realize is that every single one of those micro decisions, every flick of the thumb, every second spent evaluating a headline, consumes literal, finite metabolic resources in your brain.
The brain is an engine, and it runs out of gas.
Right. We only have so much attention, working memory, and self-regulation available to us on any given day.
As you consume this endless, algorithmically curated stream of outrage, you experience a profound state of decision fatigue. As your cognitive load reaches total saturation, your brain simply runs out of the energy required for reflective, critical evaluation.
Wait, so you're saying you literally lose the biological ability to think deeply, like the battery just dies?
Yes, the battery for higher-order thinking dies. When cognitive saturation hits, the brain instinctively shifts from reflective evaluation to reactive heuristics.
Like mental shortcuts.
Exactly. You start relying on impulsive emotional shortcuts just to process the sheer volume of data. You become highly susceptible to polarization, you fall for misinformation much faster, and you become incredibly vulnerable to emotional manipulation.
Wow.
Now, let's tie this directly back to what we discussed about poiesis and the burden of self-creation. If your spirituality and your very identity are tied exclusively to your internal emotional state because you believe your feelings are the ultimate truth, and your emotional state is currently being manipulated by a trillion-dollar machine designed to make you angry,
your identity is going to violently fluctuate in tandem with whatever the algorithm decides is the viral outrage of the day.
Exactly. You have handed the remote control of your soul over to a machine optimized for conflict.
The sources quote a cultural analyst who calls this modern condition zoochosis, which is such a striking, visceral word.
It's a brutal analogy.
It is. Zoochosis is the clinical term for the psychological madness that captive animals experience when they are trapped in a highly artificial environment that their biology was never designed for.
It's the tiger endlessly pacing the concrete cage.
Or the bird pulling out its own feathers. The argument the authors are making here is that the 2026 digital landscape is that artificial concrete cage for the human soul. We are endlessly performing, optimizing, and defending to maintain a self-constructed identity, while unseen algorithms throw raw meat at our negativity bias to keep us engaged.
It is a recipe for total systemic human exhaustion.
How could you not be exhausted?
The prevailing therapeutic culture continuously tells us that our unhappiness comes from society suppressing our true authentic self. So the solution they offer is to just be more authentic, to express yourself louder.
Just be more you.
Right. But in this digital cage, the relentless daily demand to curate, broadcast, and perform this authenticity becomes a crushing new form of legalism. It's a full-time job with no days off, no vacation time, and no retirement.
So when people inevitably hit the wall, when they feel this deep existential digital burnout, the zoochosis, it is incredibly natural that they try to find a way out.
They look for an escape hatch.
They turn to spirituality for an escape. looking for some kind of life raft in the turbulent water. But according to the deep dive we're doing into these sources, the type of spirituality that most modern people reach for actually accelerates the problem.
It's throwing gasoline on the fire.
Let's talk about vibe-based spirituality and emotivism, because this is where the cultural critique gets really sharp.
Yes, the sources lean heavily on the empirical work of sociologist Christian Smith here. After conducting extensive, multi-year research into the religious beliefs of modern Americans, Smith coined a term for the dominant religious worldview of both youth and adults. He called it moralistic therapeutic deism, or MTD.
Moralistic therapeutic deism.
Yeah.
That is a massive academic mouthful. Break down what that actually looks like in practice. I mean, what does an MTD believer do on a Tuesday?
It sounds like a complex theological system, but its underlying premises are actually remarkably simple and, frankly, deliberately shallow.
Oh, really?
MTD posits that there is indeed a God, but he is completely distant. He isn't involved in the daily, gritty mechanics of the universe.
So he's just watching from afar.
Right. He certainly isn't demanding strict obedience or laying down absolute moral laws. In this framework, God's primary function, almost like a cosmic butler or a divine therapist, is simply to step in and solve your problems when you get in over your head.
Oh, wow.
And to ensure that you feel happy, authentic, and fulfilled. It is a highly aesthetic, consumer-driven approach to the divine.
Hence the term vibe-based. It's less about a rigorous theology of the universe and much more about cultivating a specific personal aura.
Exactly.
It's curating some healing crystals, posting some out-of-context inspirational quotes overlaid on a sunset, and just maintaining a general fuzzy feeling of being a good person who puts positive energy out into the universe.
That is exactly the manifestation of it, and this ties deeply into the philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre's concept of emotivism, which the sources argue is the operating system of the modern world. Emotivism is the pervasive, unquestioned cultural doctrine that all evaluative judgments, especially moral judgments about right and wrong, are nothing more than expressions of personal preference and subjective feeling.
So there's no right or wrong, just what I like and what you like.
In a truly emotivist culture, it is considered arrogant or even offensive to say, this is objectively true, or that action is objectively false. You are only permitted to say, I personally prefer this, or I feel strongly about that. If an individual feels deeply in their core that a certain action or identity is right for them, the culture mandates that the subjective feeling must be affirmed as ultimate truth, regardless of any contradictory claims from history, biology, or traditional theology.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here, because to a modern ear, a lot of that sounds pretty reasonable. Isn't emotional sincerity inherently a good thing?
Sincerity is great, yes.
Shouldn't what we believe about the universe feel deeply authentic to who we are on the inside? If I don't truly feel it in my heart, isn't following some external religious rule just fake? Isn't it just hypocrisy?
This raises an important question, and it highlights the exact philosophical trap that the modern therapeutic culture sets for us. Sincerity is, of course, a human virtue. No one is arguing for hypocrisy.
Right.
But the culture's absolute mandate, the idea that intense emotional sincerity is the ultimate metric for determining objective truth, is a complete illusion. Human emotions are incredibly volatile and easily manipulated.
That's true.
Your emotions are influenced by your blood sugar levels, whether you got 6 or 8 hours of sleep, and, as we just spent time discussing, the specific engagement algorithm running on your phone at this very second.
That's a really fair point. If I haven't had my morning coffee, my emotional sincerity is going to tell me that the world is a very dark, hostile place, and everyone is out to get me. My truth changes based on caffeine.
Which perfectly illustrates the danger. Relying on shifting emotions as the foundational bedrock of your truth guarantees structural instability. The sources point out that this vibe-based MTD spirituality operates entirely on the surface level of felt needs.
As long as you feel good, it works.
It works perfectly fine on a sunny Tuesday afternoon when your bank account is full, your health is good, and everyone agrees with you. But it collapses completely and instantly when it confronts the harsh, jagged realities of the human condition.
Because profound, devastating suffering doesn't feel good. Systemic historical injustice doesn't feel pleasant or authentic.
And furthermore, traditional biblical demands concepts like self-denial, rigorous repentance, and the command to take up one's cross and suffer for a higher cause are inherently, unavoidably antithetical to the therapeutic pursuit of maximizing momentary personal happiness.
They clash completely.
When a true crisis hits, a person living in the imminent frame say, a sudden terminal cancer diagnosis, the catastrophic loss of a career, or a deep betrayal by a spouse. An aesthetic, vibe-based spirituality entirely devoid of objective truth evaporates.
It just disappears.
It lacks the ontological weight to hold you down when the hurricane makes landfall. Because your only compass was what makes me feel good and nothing feels good right now, you are left entirely defenseless against despair.
Which brings us finally to the core argument of the document, the antidote. If vibes and subjective feelings fail us in the dark, and if the burden of creating our own identity from scratch is exhausting us to the point of digital zoochosis, what is the actual alternative?
And it's a surprising one.
Enter the catechism. But, as the source material makes very, very clear, we need to forget whatever pop culture stereotype we have in our heads. This is not the catechism the way you probably remember it from a strict childhood upbringing or a movie.
No, it is a fundamentally different approach. Modern educational prejudices have done a massive disservice to the historical concept of catechesis.
Wow, so.
In the 21st century, we tend to view it as a sterile, backwards relic of a less enlightened past. We associate it with mindless rote memorization, forced compliance, and a total disconnect from any authentic spiritual experience. We picture children sitting in rigid rows, just reciting dusty, meaningless answers to dusty, irrelevant questions.
It's like being forced to eat a bowl of completely plain oatmeal every morning. Someone tells you it's good for your spiritual health, maybe, but it is utterly joyless and bland.
But when you look at it through the lens of cognitive psychology, which is what these sources do so brilliantly, the entire picture changes. From the perspective of modern educational theory and cognitive science, a catechism functions as a highly effective form of cognitive scaffolding.
Cognitive scaffolding.
It provides a rigorous, comprehensive mental map of reality. And to understand why a mental map is so desperately needed right now, we need to look at something called schema theory.
Schema theory. Okay, I read this part of the notes and I think I get it, but let's unpack this for everyone. What is a schema, practically speaking? It's just like muscle memory, but for your brain.
That is a helpful way to think about it. Schema theory posits that human beings require predefined cognitive structures, schemas, to rapidly process new information, interpret complex context, and navigate chaotic environments without becoming overwhelmed.
Okay.
Think of a schema as a massive, highly organized mental filing cabinet. When a brand new, complex piece of data enters your brain, if you have a well-developed schema, your brain knows exactly which folder to put it in, how it relates to the other folders, and what to do with it.
But without a schema.
Every single new piece of data requires immense, exhausting mental effort to evaluate from scratch, categorize, and make sense of.
Okay, let me try an analogy here.
Yeah.
So catechism isn't just about memorizing theological dictionary so you can win a trivia game.
No, not at all.
It's more like installing a massive, highly optimized new operating system in your brain.
Oh.
Once the OS is installed, it runs in the background, so you don't have to manually write the code for every single ethical or spiritual decision you make throughout the day.
That is a brilliant analogy, and it perfectly captures the cognitive mechanics at play. Yes, a catechism is an operating system for reality. By slowly, methodically memorizing foundational questions and answers, the individual internalizes a robust, interconnected theological framework.
And then what happens?
This framework then acts as a structural lens through which all subsequent information, crises, and cultural shifts are interpreted.
The sources dive into two massive historical examples of this from the Reformation era to show what this looks like in practice. They point to the Heidelberg Catechism from 1563 and the Westminster Shorter Catechism from 1647.
Two incredible documents.
And reading the descriptions, these clearly weren't just academic textbooks meant for scholars. They were comprehensive, deeply interlocking worldviews meant for everyday people. The Heidelberg Catechism, for instance, maps out the entirety of human reality in three distinct parts. It clearly defines the misery of human sin, it outlines the specific deliverance provided by Christ, and it details the gratitude that should naturally define the Christian response to that deliverance. It has a narrative arc.
It tells a story.
And the Westminster Catechism maps out exactly what humans are to believe concerning God and the duties God requires of them in 107 very precise, tightly wound Q&As.
And here's where we connect this 16th and 17th century practice directly back to the exhaustion of 2026. This cognitive scaffolding directly mitigates the profound decision fatigue we talked about earlier.
Oh, because you don't have to decide everything from scratch.
Think again about the cognitive load saturation of the modern digital landscape. You open your phone, and you are instantly bombarded with moral panics, complex ethical dilemmas regarding new technology, and viral cultural outrage.
You are asked to have a nuanced, fully formed opinion on 12 different highly complex global crises before you've even finished your breakfast.
Exactly. If you are operating on a vibe-based system of poiesis, you have to invent your moral foundation from scratch every single time a new crisis trends on your feed. You have to ask, how do I feel about this? What does my peer group think? What is the authentic response?
It is so exhausting.
But when a deeply catechized believer faces a novel ethical crisis, they do not have to reinvent their moral foundations. The Catechism has already mapped the foundational terrain of justice, mercy, human nature, and divine sovereignty.
The OS is already installed. It just processes the new data through the existing code.
Precisely. The core doctrine remains stationary, and biologically, this preserves your executive function. Instead of exhausting all of your finite mental resources on the perpetual invention of your ethics, you can focus your energy on the actual execution of your ethics.
You just do the right thing instead of figuring out what the right thing is.
You have a secure, unbreakable tether during periods of intense psychological and cultural turmoil. You aren't swept away because you are tied to a rock.
Having this mental map, this operating system, doesn't just save energy, though. The source material argues that it actively protects you from psychological spirals. It gives you a vocabulary for the inexpressible, and it builds what the authors call a theological immune system.
The immune system concept is key.
Let's talk about the vocabulary first, because this specific point really struck me. How does memorizing a 400-year-old catechism actually dismantle the modern tyranny of feelings?
It dismantles it by providing an objective, historically grounded vocabulary for human experiences that raw, unfiltered emotions simply cannot articulate. As we established, emotions are highly volatile. More importantly, they lack linguistic precision.
They're just blunt feelings.
When profound tragedy strikes, when the hurricane hits, if you only possess your internal modern therapeutic vocabulary, you might only have words like despair, confusion, unfairness, or trauma.
Which just feeds the downward psychological spiral.
Yeah.
You just loop those inadequate words over and over in your head because you have no other way to describe the pain.
But a deeply catechized mind possesses an entirely different, incredibly robust lexicon. The sources use the famous first question of the Heidelberg Catechism as the prime example of this. The question simply asks, what is your only comfort in life and in death?
Such a huge question.
The answer provided does not rely on the emotional state of the speaker at all. It doesn't tell the person to say, my comfort is that I feel a warm presence, or my comfort is that I am living authentically to myself.
I have the quote right here. The required answer is that I am not my own, but belong body and soul in life and in death to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ.
Notice the breathtaking scope of that statement. Body and soul in life and in death. It is declaring an objective, historical, cosmic reality.
Wow.
When immense grief hits a person who has internalized this, they have access to words like providence, justification, and eschatological hope. This theological vocabulary transcends whatever the immediate emotional vibe of the room is.
It grounds them.
Crucially, it allows the believer to speak objective truth to their emotions rather than constantly trying to extract truth from their chaotic emotions. It acts as a cognitive circuit breaker against spiraling anxiety.
I love that image. You are actively telling your emotions what reality actually is, rather than letting your midnight panic dictate the nature of reality.
And this leads directly to the biological analogy used in the text, which I think is one of the most powerful concepts in the deep dive. The theological immune system. Let's look at biology for a second. How does a physical human immune system actually get strong?
Well, it has to be exposed to things. It needs exposure to germs, dirt, pathogens, and bacteria. If you raise a child in a completely sterile, hermetically sealed plastic bubble, the very first time they walk outside and get a common cold, it completely wipes them out because they have no antibodies.
Exactly. The human body requires the structured memory of past biological threats in order to deploy a targeted defense in the future. The argument here is that the human mind is no different.
Interesting.
The mind desperately needs structured exposure to complex theology, to incredibly difficult ethical questions, and even to historical heresies. A robust catechism acts precisely like a theological vaccine. It clearly maps out the boundaries of orthodoxy and introduces the mind to complex doctrines in a controlled educational environment.
So what does this all mean for the average person today? Does it mean that our modern instinct, which is usually avoiding the hard, controversial, or difficult parts of history and theology because they make us uncomfortable, actually makes us more vulnerable to whatever manipulation the digital landscape throws at us?
It absolutely does. The modern therapeutic desire to create a perfectly safe, frictionless, entirely affirming spiritual environment where nothing challenging is ever discussed and no hard doctrines are examined acts exactly like that sterile biological bubble.
So it's actually dangerous.
It feels safe in the moment, but it guarantees catastrophic failure later on. Because when a deeply catechized individual is exposed to a destructive cultural narrative or a highly manipulative digital outrage cycle designed to make them angry, their theological immune system immediately recognizes the ideological pathogen.
The schema flags the data, it triggers the antibodies.
Yes. Instead of being instinctively swept away by the viral outrage or the political panic, the mind intuitively flags the incoming data. Wait, that narrative contradicts the established historic character of God, or that proposed solution is a fundamental distortion of biblical justice.
It catches it early.
The pre-installed cognitive framework catches the error before the emotion has time to take over the steering wheel. Furthermore, and this is vital, this practice moves the individual out of the isolating, lonely trap of expressive individualism.
Right, because if truth is only found by looking deep inside yourself, you are totally, fundamentally alone in the universe. You're the only one who can verify your reality.
You become a solitary consumer of customized spiritual content. But the very word catechesis comes from a Greek root that implies an echo, the resounding communal transmission of core texts across generations.
It's a shared thing.
When you willingly submit your mind to a historic catechism, you are actively connecting your mind to a vast living communion spanning centuries. You gain immense communal strength and social cohesion. You are adopting the same mental map used by believers hundreds of years ago.
That connection is the ultimate antidote to the profound loneliness of the modern digital cage.
It truly is.
Okay, so this all sounds incredibly compelling in theory. Cognitive scaffolding, theological immune systems, linguistic circuit breakers. It makes perfect sense from a psychological perspective. But the real question is, does it actually work in practice?
That's the test.
When the rubber meets the road, when society turns violently against you, when things get truly dark and dangerous, does a memorized Q&A actually hold up? The sources provide 3 brutal historical stress tests to prove that this isn't just theoretical. It works in the harshest conditions imaginable.
Real-world proof.
And I want to pause here and mention to you listening, our sources are very clear to point out that we aren't looking at these events to make a political statement or to endorse the politics of the Roman Empire, 17th century France, or modern states. We are strictly observing the psychological mechanics of human resilience. We are impartially reporting how these groups manage to survive under intense state pressure.
Right. It's about the mechanics of survival.
So let's start with case study 1. The early church, spanning the 1st through 3rd centuries. What did this mental mapping look like under the Roman Empire?
The early church existed as a highly marginalized, heavily persecuted minority in a deeply hostile Roman environment that demanded religious conformity to the state. To survive this pressure, they didn't rely on casual gatherings or emotional worship alone.
They needed more than that.
They developed an incredibly rigorous institution called the catechumenate. This was not a quick process. It was an intensive, multi-year process of doctrinal and moral formation for new converts. And it was explicitly understood by the church leadership as formation for martyrdom.
Formation for martyrdom. They weren't messing around. This wasn't a 6-week introductory class with coffee and donuts in the fellowship hall where you just learn how to be a nice neighbor. They were preparing people to die.
They understood the stakes. It was the systematic, rigorous dismantling of the pervasive pagan worldview and the slow construction of a Christian cognitive schema. The sources highlight St. Augustine's foundational text on this, De Catechizandis Rudibus, which translates to On Catechizing the Uninstructed.
Catchy title.
Augustine stressed that catechesis must present a comprehensive narratio, a cohesive, unbroken summary of salvation history, starting from the dawn of creation and extending all the way to the end of time.
By situating the individual believer inside this massive, objective historical narrative, they built an impenetrable psychological resilience. Think about the mechanics of it. When these believers were eventually dragged before Roman magistrates, told to burn incense to Caesar, or threatened with the arena, they weren't relying on vibes.
No, vibes wouldn't cut it.
They weren't looking inward to find their personal truth, because internal feelings would understandably be screaming in terror. Instead, they relied on a meticulously constructed objective reality that they had spent years memorizing. It allowed them to face literal execution with an ingrained, structured hope rather than chaotic despair.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that their survival under state terror was not an accident of history. It was the direct, measurable result of systematic cognitive preparation. They built the mental fortress before the siege began.
They were ready.
And we see the exact same psychological mechanism deployed centuries later in our second case study, which is truly remarkable. The French Huguenots in the 17th and 18th centuries.
This one is incredibly intense, and I have to admit, I didn't know much about this specific era before reading the sources. In 1685, King Louis XIV issues the Edict of Fontainebleau.
A devastating decree.
This edict completely legally criminalizes the Protestant Reformed faith in France. Pastors are given days to leave the country or face execution. Historic church buildings are literally torn down to the foundation stones. And maybe the most chilling, psychologically terrifying part: Protestant children were legally required to be taken from their parents and raised by Catholic priests in state institutions to ensure the Reformed faith was permanently eradicated from the next generation.
Faced with total institutional annihilation, no buildings, no pastors, no legal standing, the Huguenots went underground. They formed what became known in history as l'Église du désert, the Church of the Desert.
Church of the Desert.
And the question is, how did they survive for over a century under intense violent state terror without any public infrastructure? They couldn't hold massive rallies. They relied almost entirely on the clandestine distribution and rigorous memorization of catechisms in the home. Specifically, the sources note the widespread use of catechisms written by Charles Drelincourt and Jean-Frédéric Osterwald.
I just marvel at these Huguenot parents. Imagine the sheer dedication and the sheer terror. Imagine the fear of the state's dragoons knocking on your door at night.
Unimaginable pressure.
And yet, in the dark, by candlelight, you are secretly whispering and systematically teaching these complex theological Q&As to your young children. You are doing it because you know that if they are taken, you have to preserve their psychological and spiritual identity against state indoctrination. You are giving them the cognitive armor they need to resist brainwashing.
Mechanically speaking, it functioned as an intellectual and spiritual fortress. When a child was pressured by state authorities to recant, the memorized catechism provided an alternative linguistic reality.
It protected their minds.
It prevented their assimilation into the state religion, even when giving in would have provided immediate political, social, and economic safety. The schema held fast under pressure. Again, systematic doctrinal transmission provided the anchor. Which brings us to the third and final stress test outlined in the sources: the Chinese house church movement in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Right. Following the Communist Revolution, and especially during the horrors of the Cultural Revolution, the visible institutional church in China was completely decimated. Bibles were burned, leaders were imprisoned.
Driven completely underground.
But incredibly, the underground church experienced explosive, unprecedented growth. How do they achieve that while facing constant surveillance, threats of arrest, labor camps, and the literal confiscation of all physical theological texts?
Because they could not rely on physical texts, they relied on deeply memorized systematic doctrines. They maintained a rigid, unyielding adherence to the essentials of the faith, rather than relying on emotional experiences or charismatic personalities, which can be easily broken in an interrogation room.
Charisma doesn't survive interrogation.
Exactly. They utilized underground catechetical manuals, such as the recovery version of the Bible, and specific doctrinal summaries, to train new converts rapidly but deeply. They centered their mental maps on the absolute divinity of Christ, justification by grace, and crucially, they instilled a robust theology of the cross that actively anticipated suffering as a normal part of the Christian life.
The sources mention Pastor Wang Yi, who articulated this dynamic perfectly before his own imprisonment. He wrote that it is the objective truth of the gospel, not our subjective feelings about it, that prevents the church from yielding to immense political pressure.
A powerful witness.
When you are sitting in a cell facing the massive, terrifying apparatus of the state, you cannot be ruled by fleeting emotions. Your emotions will tell you to submit. Only a rigid adherence to objective truth gives you the leverage to stand firm.
What is truly fascinating here is the undeniable structural common thread across all three eras, from the blood-soaked arenas of ancient Rome to the hidden desert churches of 17th century France to the underground networks of modern China.
It's the same mechanism.
None of these groups survived on emotional vibes. They did not survive by turning inward to discover their unique personal authenticity. They survived because systematic instruction provided an objective reality that existed completely independently of their circumstances. It built a cognitive architecture so dense and so strong that external pressure, even the threat of death, could not collapse it.
Okay, so let's bring all of this incredibly heavy history back to the present moment. We have diagnosed the deep exhaustion of the modern digital cage and the burden of poiesis.
The disease.
We have defined the cognitive scaffolding of the catechism and schema theory. We have looked at the brutal historical proof that this method builds an unbreakable psychological immune system, but now we have to actually bring it home to the listener.
The practical application.
We might not be dodging Roman magistrates today, and we hopefully aren't hiding from state dragoons, but we are absolutely trying to survive severe digital burnout and the weaponization of our negativity bias. How can you practically integrate this ancient, rigorous study into a high-speed, hyper-fragmented 2026 lifestyle?
This is where we encounter a fascinating, almost ironic paradox in the sources. The proposed solution involves intentionally co-opting the very digital tools that currently cause our cognitive load saturation and using them to build resilience. The sources introduce the concept of spaced repetition systems, or SRS.
Like Anki or those other specialized memory flashcard software apps you can get on your phone.
Exactly. The concept of spaced repetition is rooted in heavily researched cognitive science, specifically targeting what psychologists call the forgetting curve and the spacing effect.
The forgetting curve.
First discovered by Hermann Ebbinghaus, the forgetting curve maps how quickly the human brain naturally loses new data. The brain is efficient, it actively prunes information it thinks it doesn't need. SRS software counters this biological pruning by using algorithms to prompt you to review information at the precise moment your brain is statistically most likely to forget it.
Oh, that's smart.
If you remember it, the interval before the next review increases exponentially, from a day to a week to a month to a year, until the memory is permanently hardwired into your long-term storage.
So instead of cramming for a theological test, stressing out, and forgetting everything the next day, you review a catechism question one day later. If you get it right, you don't see it again for 3 days, then a week, then a month. It becomes effortless.
It does.
And the sources suggest using microlearning for this. Instead of sitting down for a 2-hour grueling study session, you use short 5 to 10-minute daily sessions where you just actively recall a few catechism questions on your phone.
It perfectly aligns with modern attention patterns. We are used to picking up our phones for 5 minutes while waiting in line. But using an SRS app deliberately counteracts passive algorithmic consumption.
I just have to pause and appreciate the irony here. So we are essentially using our smartphones, the exact physical devices designed by trillion-dollar companies to make us emotionally reactive, outraged, and exhausted, to train our brains to be emotionally grounded and anchored in ancient truth. That is an incredible plot twist.
It is a radical subversion of the technology. Instead of opening your device to let an engagement algorithm feed you a curated stream of emotionally manipulative content designed to trigger your negativity bias, you open your device to engage in the active cognitive retrieval of objective historic truth.
You flip the script?
Over months and years, this daily 5-minute practice constructs an incredibly durable mental model. It automates the recall of deep theological concepts.
It builds that catechetical identity we talked about earlier. Because it is reinforced daily, in small, manageable increments, the mental map stands completely independent of whatever the digital trend of the day is.
It becomes reflex.
You develop a reflexive, almost muscular capacity to interpret the chaotic world through a stable theological lens rather than a frantic emotional one. But, and there's a big but, the sources note there is a final, ultimate challenge here. And it's not a technological challenge of figuring out how to use an app. It is a profound matter of the will.
Yes. This is the hardest part for the modern individual to accept. We are ultimately challenged to trade the shallow, fleeting, culturally celebrated satisfaction of finding yourself for the profound, often difficult submission of the ego to an eternal, objective truth.
Submission is a tough word.
It is. The therapeutic search for an authentic inner self invariably ends in psychosis and exhaustion because the human self was simply never designed to bear the massive weight of its own justification.
You can't be your own absolute moral compass. It's too heavy. It will crush you.
Systematic instruction demands submission. It requires looking at a text and acknowledging that truth exists outside of your feelings, and that your feelings, no matter how sincere or intense, must be subordinated to that truth.
Which flies in the face of everything culture tells us.
To a culture completely steeped in expressive individualism, this demand for submission feels terribly restrictive. It feels like a loss of freedom, a step backward into the dark ages. But historically, sociologically, and psychologically, submitting to a robust external order is the only actual pathway to genuine spiritual liberation.
Because by adopting this robust foundation, you are finally freed from the tyranny of constant self-creation. You don't have to wake up and invent yourself today.
Exactly. The pressure is off.
You don't have to formulate a bespoke, ethical response to the latest outrage cycle. You could just rest in what is objectively true. And that brings us to the end of our journey today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We started by looking at the deeply exhausting burden of trying to constantly create and curate our own identities in a digital world meticulously engineered to keep us angry and engaged.
We examined how vibe-based spirituality, relying solely on sincere but volatile emotions, completely collapses under the pressure of real life, lacking the structural integrity to withstand genuine suffering.
And we saw how the ancient practice of the Catechism isn't just dusty, joyless rote memorization. It functions as incredibly powerful cognitive scaffolding.
The new operating system.
It installs a mental operating system that frees us from decision fatigue. It gives us an objective vocabulary for our darkest moments, and it builds an unbreakable theological immune system, a system proven to work through centuries of brutal history, from the early church facing the lions, to the Huguenots hiding in the dark, to the modern day.
It is ultimately about properly ordering our emotions to reality. When faith is built on systematic instruction rather than fleeting vibes, the resulting emotional experience isn't an unstable panic reaction to the news cycle. It is a resonant, durable joy born of absolute certainty.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as you close this app, put your phone in your pocket, and go back out into the real world. If our modern digital zoo is meticulously, brilliantly engineered to make us endlessly distracted, perpetually exhausted, and highly emotionally reactive,
The big question.
is the most radical, rebellious act you can possibly commit in the year 2026 simply taking 5 minutes a day to memorize an ancient, unchanging truth?
That is the defining question of the age.
Keep exploring these concepts, look into those historic catechisms, and stay curious. That wraps up this deep dive into the source material. We'll catch you on the next one.